Hello and welcome back to Something Rotten, Season 3, Manhunt, Episode 2. Blake and I have beat Manhunt by Rockstar Games. We have finished it. We have dispensed with any number of pigs of any number of varieties, and we're here to talk about it. I'm Jacob Geller. With me is Blake Hester. Blake, how many times did you feel like you were going to throw the controller through the wall while playing these second 10 levels?
Well, Jacob, I figure I should begin this episode with a bit of an admission, perhaps. I had to watch the last couple levels. I
thought that might happen.
And here's the thing. I didn't feel bad doing it. A, because life is short. B, I didn't think you would care. C, by the end of this game, I felt like it had thrown away everything I liked about the game. And I was just like, it would be easier for everyone if I just watched this on YouTube. And honestly, now that I have seen the whole thing, I only regret not playing one of the levels. It seemed like I would have continued having a miserable time through the last, 2 or 3 levels.
That is really interesting because I have to say, I felt like these last 10 levels, I was like, the game is paying out. I felt like I paid my dues in the first 10 levels. I got smacked around, and in these last 10, I was like, I get it in a way that I did not necessarily through the first half. So I am really excited to talk to you about what happened and kind of like the weird gameplay things that it does here. I think, most importantly, it was just a repeating cycle. You know, the end of the 10th level was basically the end of the 9th and the 8th, where you got through a section, you got thrown into a van and taken to the next place. And so the main interesting thing, plot-wise, that this one does is you break out of that cycle. You get to a point where the director is like, okay, Cash, you did a good job. Now I'm gonna fucking kill you.
Right.
And then, surprise, you survive. Also, bad trap by him being like, I'm gonna kill you by putting in the same kind of room that you've been murdering through for this entire game. But you escape, and then the last half of this, even more than half, is kind of outside of the realm of the snuff film that you had been theoretically making for all of the game so far.
Yeah, I thought it was I don't know. I felt like the game lost some of its vibe by then, and I don't know if that makes me a freak to be like, I wanted to do more of the snuff stuff, but I found the game more interesting going kind of gang by gang, district by district of Carcer City, and kind of exploring the world that way, where by the end it felt like just kind of this prolonged sequence of now Cash is trying to escape. And I think the thing that really killed it more than anything for me is when this game starts focusing on guns, I'm just not into it. I never was into it. And that's eventually why I kind of gave up, was I have done this many gun levels in a row. I'm not enjoying the vibe anymore. I'm not enjoying playing this. And yeah, I don't know. It lost me by then. What connected with you more?
I mean, gosh, there are a lot of things. I think one of the things that I thought was cool about this, and I feel like we're going in deep before we maybe go in shallow, but in the first couple gun levels that we had in the first section, it was you were just, everyone knew where everyone was all of the time.
Yeah.
That in that shopping mall area, it was just you walked into a room, you had shot up the previous room, everyone was aware that you were walking into a room. It was just a shootout. And this I found, and especially in the levels with kind of the city cops, that there was a lot more of, what the back of the box would describe as cat and mouse gameplay, where it's I would shoot and then disappear into the shadows, and then they would be looking for me, and I would hide and whatever. And so I felt there was just a ton more gun stuff. You're absolutely right about that. But for me, I thought that they did a good job of like adding variety in the gun levels. And also, like, I do have to say, I just like the guns are predictable in a way that the stealth was not. And so, like, even though often it still feels like the game is completely unfair to you, it's like
Sure.
you don't have to worry about someone spinning around 180 degrees when you're trying to shoot them, because like you don't have to do that whole wait and see with with a melee weapon. But before we get into that, let's talk about those first couple levels, because I think both of us were really into them. Which are the Asylum.
Yeah, those levels are problematic to say the least.
Sure.
But yeah, they're really cool. I mean, the game's levels really open up in that back half. And it feels like it starts with this one. Like, compared to the first half of the game, the Asylum feels massive. Just kind of the, I don't know, you would call them dungeons you seem to enter, you know, where it's like, here's this 10 guys, here's this next 10 guys. They feel huge and more dynamic than a lot of the other levels. There's kind of that greenhouse area in the Asylum.
Yeah.
Where there is a metric shit ton of dudes, and like you can get a gun, but you're never going to have enough bullets to take them all out. And there are no good hiding spots. And the game is just like, figure it out. And it took me like 30-40 minutes to finally clear that room. But it felt so fun. Like, it was delivering on some of the more immersive simi stuff from the first half. It felt like I was full blown Harvey Smith made this shit. Just, you know, whatever means you have to get through this, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, where previously it was like, you know, okay, this is like, you know, one street and there are 3 guys, and the game just clearly has an idea of like how I'm going to do this. Here it was kind of like, it was like, am I supposed to be hiding here? Is this, you know, is this intended? Can I just like outrun them? Can I do whatever? And I did think also, I just like, you know, let's talk about the kind of problematic elements, because I did think that it was kind of interesting that it started with, there were some lines about that were like clearly ironic of like, oh yeah, it's like the best in class. Look at all the facilities they have for the people here. You know, it was kind of doing like PR for the Asylum of like, look what a great place this is, at the same time as it was showing you that it was like an absolute hellhole. And they even mentioned, I wrote this down, they were like, the senator visited, and I was like, the senator? Like, it's funny that this is like, wait, this is like in America somewhere.
It's kind of like when TLC, or maybe it's A&E, they have those shows about prisons, and they're like, this is the most high-tech prison ever, and it's just like a door that's more heavy than a normal door. And
that's right.
And it's like, this people still live in squalor, but they can't get out of the squalor. That's pretty impressive, right? It's like, I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, so, I mean, they were definitely doing, you know, they are doing something with that. It's kind of, again, it's like, I don't really know what the game's politics are, but like they are highlighting this like difference between how this prison is like depicted, or how also the fact that it like is both a prison and an asylum, you know, is kind of like, I feel like that is commentary on its own, whether or not it like thinks it is, that they're basically used interchangeably.
Hey, Jacob, have you been listening to the Nebula feed of our podcast?
Yeah, duh. I'm impatient. I want to hear what happens on the show next week, and Nebula gets all the episodes a week early.
Sure, and they get bonus episodes too. But, you know, we still do have to record next week's episode first.
Oh, I keep forgetting we don't live in the future.
I think the game is probably politically left, but like in the ironic sense, kind of like South Park, you know, where it's like...
Yeah, it's like I would really argue that South Park is left, but it definitely, you know, it's like, it's taken shots at all sides.
It's taken the piss out of it, but it's like, also it's firmly anti-cop and anti-racist, so it's like, it's kind of good, but also like, it's also a Rockstar game from 2003, so you're gonna have to deal with some bullshit.
It's anti-racist, but they are still going to use the broadest, you know, ethnic stereotypes when they're making their things. And also, actually, this is, I'm sorry to go off on something, but can we talk about the main menu of this game? Because I've just, every time I've seen it, I've been like, that's weird. That it's just kind of a forgive me, dangerous looking black guy holding a knife.
That never like, shows up in the game.
Not a character, you know, and it's very strange that it feels almost like it's concept art from a different version of this game or something. I don't quite understand what it's going for other than this general crime aesthetic. And I do think that the fact that they choose to have that be a quote-unquote dangerous-looking black guy, even though you do not play as him or even meet them, does say something about kind of like them leaning into this aesthetic of like, what does it look like to be a murderer?
Yeah, I also feel like you don't encounter like that specific type of bad guy in the game, but I also feel like there's just not many black people in the game aside from one boss, so it's weird to like highlight it front and center so hard.
It feels kind of like the GTA cover art, where it's like a bunch of very stylized pictures that are just kind of giving the vibe of like, here's what the city is like.
Yeah.
But instead of a bunch, it's just this one character. And so that just like, it always jumped out at me, and I was like, this is doing something. I'm not sure what. But the first thing that you do in this level is like, there's a guy on another side of the door, and the way that you have to like pull him over to get him to open the door is just pull the lever on an electric chair on a guy. And then he's like, oh, what's that? And he unlocks the door and walks through, and then you can, you know, stab him or whatever. But it's like literally the first thing you do in the level is just pull the lever on an electric chair.
And worth pointing out, rare restraint here from Rockstar. You do not kill the man in the electric chair. He survives this.
Yeah, you know, I think it's almost... It's like you're giving him electroshock therapy as opposed to which is you know, still monstrous, but sure. Like, you know, it's you're not executing someone. Well, you're executing the guy who comes to check on him. That's the difference.
But there was a part of me that thought it was going to do some like faces of death type shit, where it's like, okay, now you get to watch this man electrocuted to death in a state sanctioned electric chair. But it's like, no, the guy just comes and he's like, hey man, my bad, let me turn this off for you.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I don't know how that got flipped on. There is an interesting Easter egg in this level. Is there are a lot of people sitting in electric chairs, and one of them has the original face of Cash, which is like a different looking character.
Really? I didn't see
this. Which is just, it's like, you know, I was just watching a YouTube video that was like Easter eggs in Manhunt, but like that's one of them, which I think is kind of funny. But yeah, this mission it's just cool. I think the architecture of the penitentiary really lends itself to, you know, running around in the kind of way that it wants you to, where you emerge, you get seen, you disappear again.
It feels like maybe the most diverse in terms of gameplay. Like, there is a lot of gun stuff, which I didn't mind at this point, but it also like plays around with a lot of the stealth elements later on, and once you're in the more like typical prison area, like there's the level with the rabbit, and it starts like kind of throwing different stealth puzzles at you in ways that like keep this whole 2-chapter section really interesting.
I think it's really cool how like through a lot of this, you know, I think just the 10th or the 11th level, you can like, you have this guard tower that's way above you that you like, there are guys on, but you like can't reach them. And even if you get a gun, you don't have like the range for, and then you kind of like wind your way through. And then eventually you do make it up there, and your ultimate goal for the level, which is like one of the only levels that has something like this, is like you kill the guy on the guard tower, and then you like carry him into a room, and then the director's like, good job, you did it. And another weird Easter egg is if you use like a machete or one of the weapons that will like decapitate someone, and you just bring his head in, there's like different dialogue.
Oh, really?
And the director is actually like, hey, that was really gross. I've left you a shotgun in the next room as a reward.
Oh wow. Okay, so I just like
kind of funny.
I just like shot the guy and carried his body, and then the director was like, "Okay, great. Now take off all your weapons. You don't get to keep them."
Yeah. But that level is really cool. And then I think it's the next one, which has, again, like a unique thing in the game where you are just trapped in kind of a series of cell blocks that are kind of like smashed and lead into each other. And it actually tells you, like, do a yellow execution and a red execution, meaning, like, the second most graphic and the most graphic. And then I'll unlock the door to the next place. What did you think of this level?
Well, I think it was like, it feels like one of the only levels, this and kind of the direction to kill one specific person and like bring their body for proof, feels like the only time it's actually kind of delivering upon the snuff aesthetic of it. Like, you are actually being told what to do and how to kill people, that I thought was like really conceptually interesting. This level maybe overstays its welcome, but I did like the idea of like, okay, we're going to throw 2 more people and you have to kill them within this specific parameter. Like, there's another one where it's like you have to use a specific weapon. That felt far more engaging to me than just like some of the other levels where it's like room after room of the same, setup. This one being like, hey, I am a director and you have to do this for me for my film,
Right.
Felt way more interesting.
Yeah, and I think, again, credit to the level design. When I first realized that it was like this sort of level where you're essentially going to have to like do a checklist of things, I was like, oh man, because I just, I could imagine if it told me to do that in previous levels, where it's like you have to get a red execution on someone, it would have just sucked. But like the series of like cells that you're running through here are so dense and intricate that it's like it's really easy to lose people. It's really easy to like lure one person over to like a dark corner or whatever. And so it almost felt like this was like the place that they figured out the game's systems. Like, do you know the story about Super Mario 64 where like they just had Mario run after the rabbit in that basement until it felt good, and then they were like, we can make the rest of the game?
Yeah.
That's kind of like what this felt like for Manhunt, where it's like, this is where they figured out how the stealth system worked. And so it really does. It feels like you're able to kind of use all the tools.
I agree, and then it feels like it throws away a lot of that interesting stealth stuff.
Yes,
because it's like, here's guns.
Although I do want to say, I figured out, if I played this again, I think I would have a much easier time, because I figured out a pretty foolproof melee kill strategy, which is you've got like the throwable items, the bricks and the bottles and stuff. And so if you throw here's my strategy. You see a guy, he sees you. You throw one of those at him. He gets stunned long enough that you can grapple him and get like 3 hits on him, and then just grab the brick, run away, just do that again. And it's like, if you do that 2.5 times, they're just dead and they don't have a way of attacking you. And so once I figured that out, I was like, oh, encounters with everyday, bad guys, not really a problem for me anymore.
Yeah, I would use the throw in a couple spots where I just couldn't figure the stealth out, and I was like, well, I'm going to engage 2 people at the same time. Being able to throw and stun one, then fight the second one was a strategy I used a lot of the time. Didn't always work, though, because fighting in this game is basically a death sentence, but you can cheese it hard enough.
Sometimes it feels like you're doing like Wii Sports boxing, where you're both just like swinging at each other, and it's like, it is completely random what is going to connect and what not.
Yeah. Oh, it also throwing a brick at someone, you'll sometimes have the reticle right on them. It'll be flashing the color you need, and then it'll sail like you're throwing a fucking Super Bowl winning touchdown.
And sometimes when you're trying to like attract a guy, you're going to throw this, and it's like, that guy's going to walk over there, and then I'll sneak up behind him. You throw the brick like 3 feet, and it lands like right in front of you. And it's like, I don't want him to walk to there.
You can hold the throw button and throw it at different like levels like louder or quieter depending on how hard you throw it. And I never could get it to seem to work, because occasionally it would seem like I could throw a can like the babyest throw and it would just bring like 30 dudes on me, or
Right.
I could throw a brick at like a steel drum and no one would hear it at all within the 10 feet around it.
Yeah, and one of the things that really starts to pop up in these levels, especially the gun levels, is that some of the enemies just have hard barriers on where they will go. And so it's like, I can see that there are like 5 guys on the other side of that door. Can I just get like one to walk through so I won't have to shoot them all at the same time? And the answer is frequently no. Like they will not come farther than their programming allows them to.
Or there's the flip side of it, where occasionally dudes will go way further than you ever expect, catch you off guard, and kill you, which happened to me in the subway a few times, where I thought I had a safe room, and the next thing I know, there's like 3 dudes in there on me. It feels like if this game would have come out a few years later, or maybe the sequel, we'll see, they would have had the AI figured out more, because it feels like there's a lot of interesting ideas that maybe they just could not deliver on with kind of the unpredictability of AI. The result is oftentimes the AI is just like stupid and unpredictable rather than like intelligently unpredictable, like a Hitman or something.
I really had I had big ups and downs with the AI, because especially as they start giving you more powerful guns, a lot of the ways through the level are just standing at a doorway and like 12 guys walk through and you just shoot them all in the same place, which is a very dumb thing for them to do. But at the same time, and one of the kind of interesting things I think they do with the enemies is that you start getting non-insane people to kill, because all of the kind of previous gangs that you've been killing really seem to have quite a weak grasp on reality. But eventually you start killing cops and then kind of like a SWAT team, and they talk more, and kind of like in fear, them talking gives the illusion that they are smarter than they are. Like sometimes they would yell like, "I'm flanking him," and like, I don't know if they were or not, but it was like cool to hear that and then kind of be like checking over my shoulder to be like, are they flanking? Still in the asylum, one of my favorite parts, maybe my favorite part of the whole game, if I just had to narrow it down to like a 10-second period, is you are walking through this area with like 30 locked cell doors, and you get to a part and either you push a button or the director is like, "All right, Cash, it's time to go," and you just hear like chung 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 chung, which is like the sound of all the cell doors opening, and kind of realizing what's about to happen is so scary and cool, of just like, oh my gosh, everyone in all those cells is running at me right now.
They give you a slight advantage where like you have guns but not many of them do, but like getting overrun in that is like genuinely terrifying. Like they though did you have this thing? I couldn't tell if this was the game like intentional or it was messing up. Either way, it was kind of cool, where the dudes would, I had like only 2 or 3 left, and they wouldn't run full bore at me like the beginning of the level. The last few dudes would kind of hang back and run in and out of the shadows around columns.
No, I think that's intentional, and that's actually, that's one of the things that I thought was cool about the AI, is like, this is one of the few, and the whole feeling of these levels that I really liked was like, you have a gun and they do not, which is a really different kind of power set than you know, the early levels. And so I think that they are programmed to seem kind of scared of you. That like, especially when you have, because earlier in the game you had like a shitty revolver and a shitty like sawed off shotgun, and then in this level they give you I don't know shotguns, but like a semi-automatic one, and it is way, way, way stronger than anything you've had previously. And so like, you are suddenly capable of, killing just more quickly and efficiently than you ever have in the past. And so having these guys be like scared to turn the corner, I thought felt really, unique. That it was like they're, suddenly they are James Cash and you are the enemy.
I agree. I thought it was cool. The problem is, like, it's a game from 2003, so sometimes you can't tell if you're dealing with jank that ends up cool or if
Yep.
it's intentional, because the dudes are just kind of like running zigzags between shadows, and it's like, is this broken? I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes I was giving it the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes I was like, what the hell is going on here?
So this is the level, though, I want to talk about. This is the rabbit level, which where you chase a guy in a rabbit costume for reasons I'm not entirely sure of. Maybe they just like the idea of like Alice through the rabbit hole, like, oh, isn't this kind of crazy, But it is very fun. The rabbit like sets up little challenges for you, and one of them is like, yeah, go in this room and I'm gonna unlock all the cells. Fucking figure it out, dumbass.
I think something that this game seems to kind of half invest in is this idea that the guys you're killing, the gang members are like crazy,
Yeah.
because it has like, one of the kind of iconic images of this game is like a guy with like a baby doll head mask strapped to his face, and they have this like white rabbit, and they have other people in these ways that are clearly trying to play on kind of horror tropes of like, the unhinged killers, and they're so, they've put on wacky clothing because they're just so, crazy and unpredictable. But then like they kind of, sometimes they say weird things, but like this rabbit does feel like it comes out of nowhere. It's just kind of like, why is there a guy with a rabbit costume here now?
A lot of the game feels like there was more story planned at some point. Like you and I, we took a look at some of the concept art for Starkweather, the director, and there's like a whole backstory that's never explained in the game. And I don't know if the idea was just like, I will give them this unlockable concept art that will explain backstories, or if that was planned to be in the game at some point, or like there was planned to be more exposition. But when you run into the rabbit or some of these gangs that don't have a lot of context, it feels like there was the skeleton there to like, we were going to flesh this out at some point.
It almost feels like, when you read the NES manual for Super Mario Bros. And you're like, wait, there's like context for the Mushroom Kingdom here? Like, I bet, it's somewhere there is written like why Carcer City is the way it is. But then in the game, they were kind of like, it'll be fine if we just like let them experience it.
But I don't know, because it would be interesting. Think about like Rockstar has always been like very into their own storytelling. I wonder if like there was an earlier iteration of this game that was like way more narrative driven than this ultimately ends up being.
Like to both of the game's credit and detriment, it feels like it is just one of those things where they just cut off everything that wasn't absolutely essential. The game is just so stripped down in so many ways, and in a lot of ways I think that's cool.
Sure.
But then in other ways, it feels almost like a prototype.
So let's talk about the next levels here, because it is some of the more story-driven stuff, which is a bit of a stretch to say, but also I'd say the last levels I enjoyed before I gave up. Which is when you find the journalist and you protect her for a while, and then you have a massive shootout in a casino, which is...
Well, here, yeah, so let's say like how you get to the journalist.
Remind me.
Okay, so, I mean, it is just, like, in the last part of that bunny level, you walk into a big cafeteria, and the director's just like, well, it's the end of your film, James.
Right,
you did a great job, now it's time to die. And
Hold
then...
on. Can I point out, that was kind of a little plot twist for me I did not see coming. And I thought it was really cool how anticlimactic it was. There was no big build up to it. It just like, keeping in line with the nihilism of this whole thing. It was just like, all right, dude, you've ran your course. Like, we're not going to make a big production. You're just going to die here. Like, it was very cool to not make it a big deal. And ultimately you win and you go through the finale of the game. But I liked it not making a huge production over like, this is where you plan to die. It's a room just like any other room.
But then, so then you do kind of run out, and for the first time, you don't get picked up by a van at the end of the level, but there's a different car there with a shock to me, a woman in it, who was not in underwear.
The woman from the beginning of the game, the journalist that kind of opens this entire thing.
Yeah, who picks you up and is like, we need to, like, I'm doing a story. I'm gonna try and take down the director. Can you like help me get to his apartment or something? But then James Cash is also very just like, hey, you drive where I say, get out here.
Yeah.
And kind of he has more voice lines at the end, but he's still not really a character. He's just kind of like a guy who yells things.
Yeah, so I think the conceit is like you need to go to her apartment and get her files on Starkweather, and then it brings back the tramps mission where it's like you have to tell her where to stop, where to go, but it has this interesting wrinkle where if you leave her, she starts freaking out and will kind of run through the level looking for you, which like I never had really do anything. Like she would start freaking out and I could usually get to her before she would go anywhere, but I wonder if it's like she won't run directly to you. She'll like find herself in harm's way or something. Did you figure out what would happen?
No, she also didn't. I always got back, but I did think that it was a cool way of like making her stand out from the tramp, who was kind of a guy who was like, yeah, whatever, I'll stand here for however long you want. And she was kind of, it was like, I couldn't just like walk halfway across the level and leave her in a dark corner. And so, like, I think for what it's worth, it made her feel a little more like a character,
real person,
maybe.
Yeah.
Though also, another question about Carcer City, why was her apartment there? Like, did she, how recently did she live there? Like, how recently did this place turn into, in Batman Arkham City, the plot of that game is we've just put a big wall around part of, Gotham and we turned it into an asylum. And that's like, unsaid, that feels like what has happened here. That it's just like, they just decided a whole part of the city was going to become, a prison.
I'm also obsessed with like apartments in old video games where, nowadays, like in The Last of Us or something, you go into an apartment and it's like so meticulously made, like this was a lived in space. But in old ones, it'd be like, here's kind of a bedroom. Honestly, Fortnite does the same thing. It's like, here's a bedroom and maybe a kitchen sink. And that's the entire apartment. And I love it. They feel like liminal spaces or something.
It's the goofy meme of like, you live like this?
Yeah, I love it. Like her apartment is like a bedroom and then a wide open room with nothing in it. But then across the hall is like an employee break room, which it seems to imply is her kitchen. Like, what is happening here?
It's so funny. Yeah, so you do that. I thought that she might actually be with you for longer, but she's just that one level. Also, kind of interesting. I mean, it's always kind of in the background that it's like Cash is not, as far as we know, wrongly convicted,
right?
Like it's not like he's stuck in this situation and he doesn't, I mean, no one deserves to be in Carcer City, but like, they don't make it like he was framed for a crime he didn't commit. It's like, for what we know, he is a murderer who did something that landed him on death row.
Yeah.
And yet you don't really get any sense from her, at least, that she's like scared to be with this guy, and I kind of it speaks again to just his lack of character of like, is he a scary man? I would assume so, but
it seems to imply he does have some kind of moral compass, because it's like, granted, you save your family, it makes sense you wouldn't kill your family, but like the tramp, even as mad as Cash gets at the tramp, he never lashes out or hurts him. There's no like, you could see Rockstar making a scene where it's like at the end, Cash just decides to kill the tramp. And then with the journalist, he's like, he's a dick about it because he's Cash, but like he also is protecting her and saving her and helping her, and he wants to get something out of it, but like, I don't know. It seems to imply that despite being a serial killer who you've done all these terrible things with, he's also a bit of a good guy when push comes to shove, which is a weird take for the character.
It is. So you help her get like this evidence, and then she's kind of like, okay, let's leave. And he's like, you can leave. I'm staying here. I got to kill the director. You know, I guess that's his moral compass, is kind of like, well, I'm going to get revenge on this guy who fucked me over so many times.
Sure.
And then you have this kind of weird beat where he is captured again and is like one of those movie things where it's like, if they just killed him now, it would be the easiest thing in the world. Like, he's just like lying on the ground in a circle of men with guns. But instead, they decide to play a little hide and seek game with him. And so you have this level where there are all these kind of, it's kind of like the commando gang or whatever, who's looking for you, and you are running away, and then eventually you have to kill like the boss of the gang, which is very loosely a boss fight, but we handle this in different ways that I want to talk about.
I forgot. I think this is the last level I enjoyed. This level was really fun because it felt like it cramped everything a lot more. Like,
yeah,
in ways that were really interesting, because it's like, there's still a lot of guards here, but all that open space you were used to is now completely gone. Like, these are like tight alleys, tight little garden areas, and then an entire apartment building you have to wander through.
It's like an apartment patio and an apartment building, and the building is like actually 10 stories tall, and you have to like go up all the stairs to it.
And it rules because it's throwing like different types of guards at you, because it's like, you might have one floor where it's like, yeah, they just have machetes, so you can figure this out stealthily. But then the next floor, it's like, they all have shotguns, so you need to engage in a firefight, which might bring down other dudes. So you're kind of like swapping between like guns blazing and stealth floor by floor in this apartment, which was really neat.
Yeah, that is what I did the first time, and then I died a bunch, and eventually I just learned that I could kind of run through guns blazing on all of it, because I knew exactly around each corner, you know, where the guards were. But the really, gameplay-wise, the thing about this level is it has a moment that is really Hitman-esque that I found that I think you did not. Because you get to the top of this building, and then the kind of boss pops out and is just running away from you. And so what you have to do in the level is just chase him back down all the stairs that you just walked up. But on the very top level, I walked into an apartment, and there was a big blown out wall and a sniper rifle. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I realized eventually that if you chase the boss out of the apartment building into the courtyard, and if you then run back all the way up the apartment building, you can grab that sniper rifle, and he's just standing in the courtyard, and you can just shoot him in the head from the 10th floor, and it like completely skips whatever kind of boss there would be. And it's like, it's a really long shot, and it's in the dark, and it feels like one of those sweet Hitman snipes where
that's
you
really
just,
cool.
You know, you skip it entirely. But even with that, kind of a frustrating level.
Kick in the dick, for sure. Also, I like that bosses in this game, except for maybe the one at the end, Pigsy, they actually can be put down with one shot. Like, they are not superhumans, which I think is cool. Like, this took me a lot of tries to get down and actually get into the fight with Ramirez, I believe his name is. But once I got there, it was like 2 shots and he was dead. And it was like, okay, level over. And I was like, that's kind of a cool touch to be like, that, you know, they're still normal people. The shotgun blast to the face is going to kill them just like anyone else.
Maybe we should keep, honestly, I think this would be an interesting thing to keep track of for like Something Rotten games. Because I have kind of a soft spot for any game where it's like, no matter how tough the guy is, one headshot means they go down. And like, that is and that is certainly true for Max Payne. And my guess is it's true for Kane and Lynch, but I actually can't remember. But it's like, I always think that's kind of an interesting choice of like, you know, you have to hit this guy with a bat, you know, 15 times or whatever, and he's strong, but like, he's human, so one shot in the head, down.
Sure. I mean, if I overthink it, if I add meaning where there probably is none, it does kind of just like show how meaningless life is in this world, where even the scariest character in the game is like not impervious to death. Like it's coming just as quickly for Ramirez. Yeah, which I think is cool. I don't know if they thought that hard about it, but nevertheless.
Yeah, and so then begins the sequence of the game that lasts till the end, where you kill pigs, because the next series of levels are cops.
Yeah. It kind of, it doesn't tell you explicitly. There's kind of a radio chatter moment where a lot of it is kind of broken up and garbled, but it implies, and you learn later on, that Starkweather is in cahoots with the cops, which is weird that he sent all these gangs for you. It seems like he could have just had the cops coming for you the whole game, but nevertheless. So basically you just, in Starkweather's last line of defense, he sends the entire police force after you. Like, it seems like everyday beat neighborhood cops all the way to like militarized SWAT, like just all at the same time. It's insane.
The previous episode of this, I mentioned how it's kind of interesting that in some levels you would kill like 9 people. And I was like, wow, look at the restraint. On one of these later ones, I wrote down 51 kills. It's just like they throw so many people at you.
Yeah. Which, honestly, this is like, I don't have much more to say about why I bounced off these levels other than the guns were not fun for me. The lack of like interesting stealth was not fun for me. I really want to hear what about this connected with you. Was it just like kind of the power fantasy after 13, 14 levels of not being able to go guns blazing? Like, what was it?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things. One, and this is, it's kind of like, it's almost, I would consider it a fault of the game, but then it comes back, is like, they do make the gang members so over the top that you almost, it doesn't really feel like you're killing people. And like, I think that is kind of problematic in a game that like wants you to feel like you're killing people or whatever, but it's like these, the kind of redneck Confederates and the people wearing baby masks and all of that, it's like they're all like just so ridiculous that it's like, it's kind of the same as like the psychos in Borderlands, where it's just like, who cares? And then, the cops are normal people, that it's like you can see their face, they're not wearing masks. The paths they're walking on feel more like patrol paths and less like random wandering or whatever. And so in this part of the game, I felt like I almost got why this game was subversive in a way that I didn't quite feel previously, because there are these moments where you're hiding around the corner of an alley watching 2 cops just casually walk closer and closer to you until they get close enough that you just pop out and shoot both of them. And it's like, it's really kind of violent and makes you feel like a murderer in a way that I don't think the rest of the game does, because it kind of signals that the rest of the people you're killing like don't matter, and it's like, I say that knowing that that's kind of a fucked up thing for the game to do, but like, for this part to be like, no, you are just a guy, these cops are corrupt, but they are people, and you are just like stalking them and killing them, is a really kind of wild feeling. And like doing one of those things where it's just like hiding around a corner watching them, I had the feeling of like, I don't think I've played a game that has quite felt like this, where it feels this antisocial in kind of a meaningful way.
It's okay. So hearing you bring that up is interesting, because I do remember thinking like a similar thing where it felt like I was able to empathize with the cops a little more, and it might just be like they're more slightly more humanized. Like, it almost feels like you can tell some of these, like, especially normal, just like everyday cops are probably like shitting their pants
Yeah.
looking for you throughout these levels. And then, yeah, you'll like flip a corner and put one down with like one shotgun blast, which like it felt a little dirtier in that way. Like,
Yeah, well, it feels, when you feel empowered in this game, like when you no longer feel like the underdog, then it makes the killing feel more fucked up, because it's like, it's like, I kind of have the choice of whether or not to kill this guy, and I'm doing it.
yeah.
Whereas when you're being chased by the gang members, you're like, I'm just doing everything I can to survive.
Also, the game, like, it takes away the director by this point. So, like...
Yeah, you're not being told what to do.
Yeah, so, like, there were a few parts where I role-played as, like... I wouldn't do the fucking, like, brutal kills anymore if I had, like, a melee weapon. I would just do quick kills, because I'm like, I don't know. And in my headcanon, Cash would just be trying to get through this. Like, he would have no reason to, like...
He's not trying to make, like, a cool film anymore.
On the other hand, with, like, the level in the train yard, you have no real choice but to kill everyone. It's, like, 30 people. And it's kind of this interesting dynamic where, like, you're no longer being told to do this, but you're still doing it. And part of it is the game just is kind of forcing you. But narratively, it seems like how far down this rabbit hole is Cash that he is going to now kill 30 people he maybe doesn't actually have to.
Another thing about this section that I started really kind of admiring was this feeling that they made almost like tiny set pieces, but without any fanfare, and like completely optional. But like, another one of my favorite like moments of the game, just because it felt so much like a movie, but I was in direct control of it, is like, there's this part where you're like running through subway tunnels, and there are like a number of tunnels, and it's really dark in there, and the cops all have flashlights, and so you can see the flashlights from like a ways away. And there was a time when I saw like 3 cops running towards me with flashlights, and I just kind of like, pressed my back against a corner, and they just like run right past, like they keep going because they don't know where you are. And it feels, it's just like, that feels like a movie scene, and the fact that like the director wasn't like, hey Cash, you can hide from these guys, you don't need to kill them, that it like just let me make that decision. I respected kind of it felt like Rockstar doing their copying movies thing, but in a way that like did not break the game at all.
The flashlights off in the dark distance in those tunnels is such a like cool visual flair. I will say I did have to finally turn off the visual noise on the screen. I don't know. I guess it would be like early digital cameras. Like there's kind of a filter over the whole thing.
Right.
I had to go in the menu and turn that off for this level because it became impossible to see because of how dark it was.
It's a really dark game. Yeah. Another thing that I just have written down here, which I briefly want to touch on, is the headshot animations for this game are
insane.
Completely. In the previous episode, again, we talked about like how this game is doing a lot of kind of obfuscation, where like the kill looks really violent in part because of what you're not seeing. And like, if you actually looked at the animation of him beating someone with a baseball bat, it wouldn't look like that much. When you shoot someone in the head with a rifle in this game, it is like the most over the top cartoonish. It's like there's like a hole in their skull, and like the rest of the head is still there. It was almost, it feels weird to say too much, but it's like, it felt unrealistic in a way that the rest of the game felt more or less realistic, where it was just fucking, but hey, look, maybe they looked at people getting shot in the head. I don't know.
Look, on the other hand, like, I was a big fan of the shotguns in this game, and when you point blank a dude in Manhunt with the shotgun, and you see that it is what results of their head, it felt realistic to me in a way I've always found like very disturbing. Just like, oh yeah, a shotgun would blow a hole through this man's head.
Yeah,
and some poor rock star kid had to actually design this.
Yeah, and it's it's weird that, again, you see this more in the second half because you just don't have access to weapons that can really like damage someone in that way in the beginning. let's just kind of speed through the rest of this. So eventually you move past the kind of beat cops, and you get into the kind of like the director's personal SWAT team is what it feels like.
Well, there's a really interesting part where throughout the whole game, there's always this like gang of SWAT looking dudes that show up, but they're like black. Their outfits are black and red, and they're usually who take you to the next location. And at the end of the train yard level, which is like where this game like fully goes into guns, you get cornered by actual SWAT cops. Mm-hmm. And then they are all killed by Starkweather's like secret like private military.
Yeah.
So there's like a weird thing going on there where Starkweather is betraying kind of the people working for him, and it's never really explored beyond that. But this like private military group completely wipes out the cops chasing you.
I'm gonna tell you a very weird trivia fact that I learned about the SWAT team. I'm just gonna read it straight from the Manhunt wiki. John Bernthal, best known for his role as Shane on The Walking Dead and Frank Castle in The Punisher, served as the character mold for Cerberus. So
yeah, he's the voice too, right?
Here's the thing, I don't think he's the voice. Because he's not listed in the voice credits. I think
I feel like he is because I saw
him in the credits and I was like, he's in there, but it says Manhunt motion capture performance only.
Oh, interesting.
So like John Bernthal in 2002 doing purely motion capture for Rockstar, and they were like, we don't need this guy's voice. We just want to see how he moves.
That's really strange. And yeah, it definitely delivered. I could tell watching Cerberus that was John Bernthal.
I mean, John Bernthal, a man who has gone on to do some pretty something rotten, performances.
Was John Bernthal, was he popular at this time? Or was it just like he was a struggling actor that was just ended up famous?
I think he was not famous before.
Okay, so I just looked it up. Yes. So this must just be like a wild coincidence. Manhunt is his third credit on IMDb.
That's wild.
So yeah, I guess just like maybe they've capitalized on it a little bit in the later years, or it just ends up that way. But yeah, this seems to just be something he probably did while trying to make a name for himself. Wow, wild.
Yeah. So you have these couple levels with these SWAT teams. There's a really probably the physically biggest level in the game is this hedge maze type thing. It's basically in front of the mansion that the director lives in, and it's just enormous, and it doesn't feel like there are really any boundaries on where the enemies can go at all. But you just gotta shoot them all. And this is also, this level introduces the assault rifle in the game, which is after all of your shitty inaccurate pistols and shotguns, you can just, kill a lot of people really quickly with the assault rifle, but also they can kill you really quickly with it. And so it's a lot of gunfighting. For me, it was a lot of just kiting guys through a doorway where I had a consistent, bead on them, and then just kind of shooting them all.
That's what I hated so much about the ending of this game, was just kind of cheesing the AI to kill everyone in a doorway. I don't know,
Oh yeah, I would not say that I enjoyed it. This is not one of the levels that I was gung ho on.
Okay. Man, it really, to me, feels like by this point, the vibe of Manhunt is completely gone. Which, the vibe of Manhunt sucks, and it's made to suck, but, it still had a mood, it still had a tone, it still had this thing it was doing, and by this point, it's, a really bad shooter, even by 2003 standards. I guess when I was watching it, there was no part of me that regretted my decision to just watch the last couple levels, except the Pigsy fight, which looked really cool.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a part that it earned the Manhuntness back, which was in the next level. You're inside the mansion, and again, it's this big thing, and you have to go down to the basement and start an elevator, and then go up the elevator, blah blah blah. But there was a moment where, like, at this point, guns are everywhere. You're never going to be short for ammo.
Yep.
But I actually made the call. I found kind of like an out-of-the-way room that had like a sickle in it, like a silent melee weapon, and actually deciding to swap my revolver for a melee weapon because I was like, you know what? I'm going to be more effective if I can kill them silently, which was like not a call that I had made in any of the rest of the game. Did feel cool in that it was, it was kind of like going back to, it felt like, James Cash grabbing the sickle and being like, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back. That he was, that he kind of was like, I don't need a gun. I can do this, by hand. So I liked that I was able to make that call. But yeah, a lot of this was just kind of cheesing the AI, and I was decent at cheesing the AI, and so I didn't have to like replay it much, but it's not a particularly inspired level.
There's a cutscene right around this part, maybe it's the intro to this level, which takes place at like Starkweather's estate. Like you are basically at the point where you're hunting him down. He's kind of like barricaded himself behind his PMC or whatever. But the journalist has basically launched her expose on this whole thing. And there's a line that I found really funny where she's like, and it's unclear if Starkweather will ever be able to direct again. And it's like, what do you mean? That's not a question. We've exposed this man for his multi-million-dollar snuff ring. I don't think he's going to get to fucking direct Lifetime movies after this.
There was this, so in this piece of like concept art that you unlock during the it's like just one of the extras that you can find. I'm pulling it up where I sent it to you just so I can find it, because it has some kind of weird lore where he says, once a wealthy and productive director, he has been disgraced and ostracized by Hollywood's elite. Bitter and angry, his isolation has brought about a swift decline into madness. Reduced to filming underground pornography and snuff films for a selective clientele, particularly the Japanese market, he has begun creating a new deranged genre of snuff film movie called Manhunts. And so there's a lot in there of him kind of like disgraced filmmaker being like mad at the Hollywood elite, which like now, certainly has kind of a connotation. And then the whole thing about like, yeah, he makes fucked up movies for like Japanese audiences is also this kind of like, well, my guess is they thought about that almost not at all and just threw that in, but like certainly.
Well, no, we'll talk about that in a bit. There is also an interesting thing at the bottom, which is where I started thinking a lot of story was cut from this game, where it says, throughout the game, he constantly rants against the movie industry and the people who have crossed him, which does not ever happen in the game. And I was like, that would have been really interesting to hear.
Yeah, that it would have been. Blake, hush for a second. I've got to talk about Nebula. If you've watched my YouTube videos before, you might have heard me talk about Nebula. I've put many hours of bonus videos up there, as well as uncensored and extended essays. But Nebula is not just a video platform. Something Rotten is also hosted on Nebula, and just like with my videos, watching them there is just straight up better. First off, the obvious, no ads. As much as you probably love my and Blake's voices, it's just a superior experience to listen to a podcast without ad interruptions. Every video and every podcast on Nebula comes ad-free. Secondly, you will get to hear every episode of Something Rotten a week before the rest of the world. Desperate to hear us get into that next game? It's available right now on Nebula. Thirdly, for every miniseries, we will be recording a whole bonus episode, essentially a recommendations list for further media related to the game we covered. This is where we'll really get to go outside the box and cover stuff that might not have come up on the main feed. So, more episodes sooner and without ads. Nebula even gives you a custom RSS feed so you can keep listening to it where you listen to all of your podcasts. And when you follow that link in the description and sign up for Nebula, you'll be directly supporting the show. That money from your subscription, it goes to us. But I will say, a thread that is in from the very beginning of the game and only pays off in the last level is the fucking pig man. Because this
Pixie rules, dude. Video game character of the year.
so yeah, it's like from literally I think the second level onward in like, you know, the like 15-second opening cutscenes, you will sometimes just get flashes of this like pig eating, you know, or like this kind of guy, you know, whatever. It's just like a big man snuffling like a pig. And then actually something that we didn't talk about, but I thought was really cool, is in the last couple levels, Pigsy gets loose and you hear them talking about there are two people out here.
Yeah.
And one of them is you, and the other one you don't really know, but like is Pigsy. And sometimes you will walk into a place and there will be people like completely dismembered, and it'll be like, that was not me. You know, that's Pigsy. That's the other guy out here.
It's funny because those dudes sound fucking terrified, and it's not of you. Mm-hmm. They're like, hey, let's find the dude with the sickle and kill him real quick, because we have like such a fucking problem on our hands right now.
Yeah, and it's for such a game that is otherwise, you know, while ridiculous in many ways, not supernatural. They are just like, oh yeah, Okja's in this. You know, like there's just like... There is a hybrid man pig who has a big chainsaw, and he gets out and he's fucking everything up.
Okay, so here's his biography thanks to the manhunt.fandom.com, you know, some true saints out there. Sometime before the events of Manhunt, Pigsy wasn't listed. I'm only reading this because the game literally does not tell you a thing about this pig. Pigsy was enlisted by Starkweather to perform in a snuff film ring. It is believed that Pigsy was James Earl Cash's predecessor in the snuff movies before filmed in Carcer City, but became a liability over time. This is crazy. Due to his savage and unpredictable behavior. So, was too much even for Starkweather. Eventually, he fell out of the director's favor. Pigsy had a long and successful career in Starkweather's company, starring in such movies as Pigsy's Greatest Hits and Pigsy's Bloopers. Shortly after those films were produced, Starkweather locked Pigsy away in the attic of his estate before employing James Earl Cash. So there you go.
But it's just the question of like, so they found this guy who like did look, he had like the face of a pig, and they were like, you sir are a movie star.
I can't, I never figured out if he was wearing a pig's skin. Like,
right. That's probably what it is. But like, if you look at concept art of Pigsy, it is, you know, they swing either direction. It really does look like sometimes he just does have a pig face. And
also,
yep.
It just want to point out, hanging full dong with the most comically sized penis you could ever see.
Wait, I feel stupid. I did not notice this.
So, yes, I knew this before this level because I originally wanted to use image of Pigsy for the like promotional art for the podcast.
Oh wow, there it is.
And he has his full dick out in it, and I was like, I can't use that. We can't put that on Nebula's homepage. A hilariously big penis this man is running around with.
Okay, yeah, and looking at this, it does very much look like he has the top of a pig skinned and then like stitched onto him.
Oh, also it says here, in the first encounter with Pigsy during Deliverance, his crotch is visible, but when he is encountered again, it's gone. Sometimes it will appear again.
Sometimes it will appear again.
Jacob, you could not fathom how large the trivia section on the Manhunt fandom is for Pigsy alone.
Is it stuff like they've like added, you know, Pigsy things to like GTA Online or whatever? Because I was looking at like the Manhunt subreddit and they were talking about that.
Not that I'm seeing. Oh, here's something about Manhunt 2.
Hey, no spoilers.
Okay, wait. Here we go. So he does show up in, it seems like 5 other Rockstar games, but like the trivia section is 2 times as long as the description and biography and history sections. And you can actually find a pig mask in Red Dead Redemption 2. So they're still delivering on their iconic character Pigsy. Yeah.
So they have, I will say I was shocked at myself that I did his boss fight in one try. Because it is a very, like, it's a very PS2 boss fight, and it kind of seems like it would be bullshit, but, I did it. It did have, so it starts with the biggest jump scare of the game, like, the only one that, for me, I was, like, actually got me. So, you walk into this attic, and there is a piece of glass on the ground, one of the kind of, like, weapons that you can use, and you're like, well, gonna go pick up that piece of glass, and so you just walk towards it, and then, like, right before you get to it, Pigsy jumps out from around a corner and waves his chainsaw at you, and you run away. And it is honestly, you know what it is, it's that boss fight when you're Ellie in The Last of Us and you kill David. Like, that's exactly what it is, where it's like you just have to sneak up on him 3 times, you find 3 pieces of glass, and you do it. But, like, the game does do this really cool thing where, like, he does not appear on your radar unless you can actually see him, and so you feel much less like you have control over the situation in any way. And, like, every time I walked into a room, I was, like, scared that he was going to already be there. And so you stab him 3 times, and then he runs away, and then this is the part that felt a little less polished or a little less like a boss fight. Like, clearly he's injured, and you kind of throw bricks to distract him, and eventually you get him up to, like, the very top of the staircase, and you trick him into stepping on a metal grate twice. You've got to do it twice. But then he falls through the metal grate, and you pick up the chainsaw, and you saw his little arms off, and he falls all the way down and just hits the ground in a pretty sickening way.
And I'm sorry, I am a sicko, and I won't apologize for my crimes. It was pretty awesome.
It was
cool to watch.
It was good, and I mean, it's like, it's kind of the one time in a cutscene that Manhunt does something where it's like James Cash is doing something fucked up, like if everything else has kind of been letting the character, or you be the character who's doing it. But at this point, you've been scared of Pigsy for so long that it does, it feels like the end of a horror movie where you get to give the killer a taste of his own medicine or something.
Yeah, and with a chainsaw, no less, classic homage there.
I will also say they could have made you killing him look more defensive on your part, and they did not. Like, he is extremely vulnerable. He is just hanging from this thing. He seems scared, and then you saw his arms off. And so it is a very, like, no mercy in this world. No one's like living through something.
But I would say shortly hereafter, you do an even more sadistic kill on someone.
That's right.
Which genuinely shocked me. Like, it was gruesome.
Yeah, and weirdly, I won't talk too much about this because it's kind of boring, but, like, in kind of a stupid way, the next part was really hard in a way that I just felt like it shouldn't be, where it's like a bunch of SWAT team members run out of the director's office, because you're, like, right next to the office, and the gameplay thing you're supposed to do is, like, you kill them with a chainsaw, but it's like the chainsaw just kind of worked differently and it makes noise. And so I, like, died against these 4 SWAT guys like 10 times after not dying to Pigsy once. And I was like, aren't I supposed to feel, like, cool with the chainsaw at this point? And I just didn't. But anyway, what happens after that?
You fight Starkweather, who you can put him down quickly, but he has a gun. So, there's some kind of defensive measures you have to take there. But once you kill him, you take your chainsaw and slice into his stomach, which all his guts fall out. But since this is a PS2 and they can't render it, like where you can see each gut individually, it's basically this massive blob of just, like, viscera that hangs out of him. It looks so gross. It's so disturbing.
It's like if you had an orange and you just cut it in half right at the middle point. Like, that's what he's just, like, 2 halves of a sphere, and one half is just, like, hanging out.
It somehow looks way worse than it might have if, like, it was, like, PS5 rendered like intestines and shit hanging out where you could tell what everything was. The fact is just one massive gut blob was horrible to me. And then you take the chainsaw, shove it right through his little head, his head explodes, and game over, baby. Manhunt, credits roll.
Bow, 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 Manhunt.
Some of the strangest music choices at the end of this game. A weird, shitty rock song plays, and then like a kind of upbeat synth thing plays that sounds kind of happy, and I'm like, all right, I guess that's the end. Shouts out to Manhunt.
Yeah,
that's it.
So that's it. And then, it's not like here. Well, yeah, because I guess you get what the news reporter says like before that level. And so it's just like, yeah, that's it. That's Manhunt.
Yeah, so overall thoughts.
As I've said before, the second half generally worked for me. I in our last episode, I thought it was kind of like, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting how kind of bare it was. I didn't really get the mystique of this game necessarily. And like those cop levels really got me. Like I thought that kind of like the stuff that was happening in those levels and in the mix of gameplay and actual actions that you were doing, felt pretty uniquely hostile in a way that I found really interesting. It's still, especially because the game ends so abruptly, I still don't know what this game is like about.
Yeah.
It's like, does it have like a thesis?
I think it does. It's maybe not a well thought out or delivered upon one, but I think it's like what we talked about with Cantamessa last episode. Like the idea seems to be exploring player and developer, both. And that's very important. Like 50-50, two sides of the same coin, their relationship in video game violence. And I think it's very telling that like a lot of this game is about robbing Cash of his agency. Like you'll go through and you will do all this brutality in hopes like you can kind of visualize that James is like, if I just do this one more thing, I'm out of here. And then, then you have this PMC that shows up and it's like, no, you have to keep going and you have to keep going. Just like violent video games will always exist. Which, I'm not going to say is a good or bad thing, but that seems to be the gist of this. Like, as long as you want to engage in video games, you will be forced to do violence to other people, even if they're fake. And then by the end of it, like, even when the director is gone and maybe James can have his moment to try and escape, he keeps going through this cycle. Like, he takes it all the way to the top. He keeps killing everyone. At some point with the guns, there's no choice but to kill everyone. There's no getting around it. And so it's like, he and you as the player is perpetually caught in this cycle. And that to me seems to be the gist of it. It's weird to come from Rockstar, where it's like, in some ways, is it like, Cantamessa speaking against the games he makes? Because like, you're going to make GTA San Andreas the next year, where it's like, you can also commit atrocities. You're not forced to, but that seems to be the thesis. I don't know if it really does it in an interesting way. I'm sure for 2003, it was pretty fascinating. These days, it's kind of rote to deal with like a game about game violence, but I think that's what it's saying.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take, and I am like it's a game that especially I wonder about. I mean, I think that a lot of the people who kind of speak out about games being immoral or whatever, like haven't played the game at all, which I'm not necessarily saying. You can't talk about games unless you've played the game, but like I found really interesting that like a lot of the manhunt-ness really does feel like it comes in the second half.
Sure.
Like in a way where it's like, last week I said, like, I kind of don't feel like I can make a judgment on this game. And like, I was right, because if you stop at those first 10 levels, I don't really think you like get the game. You only get the snuff film half and not the the escaping from that half. So it's fascinating, and I kind of this is what I'm really curious about. I think Manhunt 2 is not going to be as interesting. I don't really know anything about that game, but I feel like it is going to have more more story and the main character is going to be more of a character. And because of that, I think it's not going to be able to pull off the same stuff that this one did.
Yeah, I know. I've watched a couple of reviews of it that feels like you're basically on the money there. I also think it takes away the snuff aspect, which is like, on the one hand, it's like, I don't know if you can really deliver on that 2 times in a row, but also, does this game have any impact if you're just like supplanting it with like, oh, you're just kind of crazy, or you're dealing with a psychotic breakdown? It's like, feels like the snuff angle is what makes it worth it to actually play this game and like think about it critically. And if you remove that, you run the risk of creating kind of something vapid in its place to excuse this level of violence. But that's pontification. We haven't played it.
Yeah, and that being said, I am really interested in how the gameplay is going to evolve, because this game is so bare in a way that it's like, I don't think you could release a game, 6 years after this came out, or whenever Manhunt 2 comes out, that like plays as sparsely as that one. At least, not a AAA game made by a huge studio.
Yeah, I think overall, I have no desire to ever play Manhunt again. It's not like a Kane and Lynch 2 or a Max Payne 3 where I'm like, one of my favorite games ever. Can't wait to play this again. I think overall, I like Manhunt, like conceptually. Like, I think it's an interesting game, if not a very good game. It is a game I've really enjoyed thinking about. I have thought about it basically nonstop for the last 2 weeks while we've played it, and kind of like, it's weird in how bare bones it is, and yet there is like, if you want to put the time into it, like, you can really, there's a lot in this game to kind of chew on and think about, like, what it's doing or what it's trying to say, and how the gameplay and narrative kind of deliver on it themselves, which I think is basically what I was kind of theorizing with, Canon Mess's message and how that's delivered through the game's like gameplay loop. In a way, I don't want to say the game is deep, but I didn't expect it to give me this much to think about.
Yeah, I thought just by like the 4th level, I was like, well, I've seen what the game is doing, and that is really not the case.
One thing I do want to say is, like, I think it justifies its violence in a way that some other games trying to do similar things do not. Like Last of Us Part 2, I guess, to use like a very recent example. It's not dealing with the exact same ideas, but fairly similar thread in exploring like our relationship with like violence and video game violence. And I've never felt like the gore and brutality of Last of Us Part 2 was ever necessary. Like the way you can like make guts spill out of people, or there's like a scene where you hack a dude in the face with a machete and you see it in all this like beautiful Naughty Dog glory. It never felt necessary.
That it's like they could, because I think both of us generally enjoy the story of The Last of Us 2, or at least think it's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, that story could exist without guts being ripped out of someone's chest. And like, Manhunt could not. Like, you could not do this story if you didn't have that stuff.
I think Manhunt only works at this level of violence and like graphic violence and gore. Like, otherwise, I don't know. I almost feel like it would not land. Like, there wouldn't be much to think about if the game was not subjecting you to like that level of brutality at all times.
So speaking of that level of brutality, Blake, I feel like you have like you have something you've brought to tell the class about.
Well, I feel like we should talk about snuff films as a podcast digging into these things. We have like kind of skipped over snuff films as just like a general cultural item, a cultural boogeyman.
Also, I've generally done that in my life. I have skipped over snuff films, but now I am going to be reintroduced to them.
Well, I know you're joking, but like there is a big part of just like the last 40 to 50 years where we as a society have been kind of obsessed with snuff films and like very scared of them. And this game is playing on some like very classical ideas of what they are. Snuff films are weird in that no one really seems to agree on what they are. The etymology of it seems to come from a book written about the Charles Manson family, where there was this rumor that the Manson family had killed someone and filmed it on this camera they had stolen from a local TV network. And that never ended up materializing. It honestly seemed like some kind of errant reporting on the side of the author to just publish something like that when it never seemed to be verified. That came from The Family, the story of Charles Manson's Dune Buggy Attack Battalion. I believe that's the name of the book. It doesn't seem to be one of the Manson books that ever caught on, like Helter Skelter or even Chaos or something. But that seems to be the agreed upon, like, starting point of this idea of what a snuff film is. But then there's a lot of different ideas about what categorizes as a snuff film, whether it's just like someone being murdered on tape or someone being murdered on tape, like, to be traded around, or murdered on tape and then sold, and it's all kind of orchestrated by this, like, underground cabal of people who run these rings that kidnap and kill people and then, sell those for financial gain.
On that note, like, I say I've never encountered snuff films, but it's like what I have encountered is you're scrolling on Twitter and there's video of police killing someone, and it's like just against your will. Right. You are kind of like watching a death. And so what I'm kind of curious about is the difference between that, which is kind of this hell world that we all live in, where we're just like subjected to scenes of great violence, and the more classical definition, or the kind of the more intentionally made snuff movies.
So generally people seem to agree that there are no known cases of an actual snuff film, which would basically mean stuff like what you brought up. We see a lot of stuff out of ISIS and like South American cartels. Like, if you want to watch videos of murder, brutal murder, you can do it. It's like very easy. You can pull it up within 10 seconds of hearing me say this. I don't necessarily think that's snuff. Snuff to me implies some level of intentionality behind why this person is murdered and why this person is filmed. And I generally think there needs to be some kind of financial purpose. Like, a person is killed.
Well, and almost an, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like an artistic purpose, because it's like, with ISIS
kind of
movies, there is intentionality, and that they are filming it for a reason, but that's not the reason is propaganda or intimidation or like one of those things. It's not like you don't get the sense that the person holding the camera is like, I am making a movie.
Exactly. So like when I play Manhunt, it kind of seems like it fits very closely in my definition of snuff, where it's like, this is clearly for a group of people with the money to both finance, direct, and purchase this stuff. And I think that is like why snuff has become so popular in America and terrified like middle-class families, is this like, honestly, there's maybe some parallels to QAnon. It was this like, nebulous cabal of people like kidnapping and killing people and making money off these murders. Whereas you see something like the ISIS or cartel videos, and it's like, these are just kind of meant to scare their opponents or keep people away from them. They're not like selling these on the black market.
It feels almost like how the kind of scare tactics of human trafficking works, where it's like they're kind of like suburban parents who are scared that their children are just going to be like grabbed off the sidewalk and human trafficked, where it's like, well, human trafficking is a problem. That is not how it happens. Like the victims are not just like random white families, in the same way that it's like your child is not going to be like pulled into a snuff film. Yeah.
So I think that's why when you look into snuff films, there's plenty of rumors about there might be a snuff film. This person might have made a snuff film, and then they never are delivered upon, because it's like you have to have some kind of like, there has to be some capitalistic part of snuff. But that has not stopped people from thinking plenty of real movies were snuff, which I think is like, we have seen pop up for 40 years now. A famous one is Faces of Death, which a lot of at least the original Faces of Death, a lot of that is very fake footage mixed with real footage. And the real footage is not really like murders. It's like there's a lot of slaughterhouse footage or like footage of the aftermath of an accident where unfortunately a body has just been destroyed. Some people say that's a snuff film. It's obviously not. A lot of people will, there have been cases of like theatrical fictionalized movies, people thinking those are snuff films. A famous one is Cannibal Holocaust, where the director, Ruggero Deodato, which died a week ago at the time of us recording this, actually, week or two ago, which unfortunately, he was a great director. People thought he killed 5 people in his movie, and he had to go to a court in Milan and prove that his cast was not murdered. He had to bring them in. It was a whole mess because the production company made them sign contracts that they would not appear in a movie for a year after Cannibal Holocaust to pretend they were dead. And that really bit them in the ass because they had to go then find their cast and be like, hey, they're alive.
And that is much like what you were talking about with Faces of Death. That is a movie where they like kill real animals, right?
That's true.
And so it feels like that is often, it's like, well, they're killing one real thing in this. Why not humans? That it's kind of this like this logical staircase that people go down.
So there's a few more classic examples. One is the film Snuff, which I think kind of came and went. Like, it was really controversial for a moment. And people were like, oh, this is just a shitty movie, kind of capitalizing on people's fears of snuff. It's basically like, there's the movie part of it, and then at the end, it kind of breaks the fourth wall, and it's like, the director of this fake movie is like, okay, now we're going to kill our cast, or whatever. Like, it's very dumb. But one of the wilder ones is the guinea pig films, which I doubt you've ever heard of.
No.
So these are Japanese splatter torture films. Well, really only 2 of them are. There are 5 of them.
Oh boy, a phrase that I wish I could have gone my whole life without hearing.
Well, Japanese splatter, I think, is a very famous genre. It does not necessarily always indicate pseudo snuff, which is what we're basically talking about at this point. Cannibal Holocaust, August Underground, these are all pseudo snuff films, which is the genre classification. The first 2, Guinea Pigs, are also pseudo snuff. They're basically filmed under the guise of like you're watching a real snuff film, but you're not. The other 3 are like weird gory comedies, almost in the vein of like some of the Sam Raimi or Peter Jackson stuff, just with a way lower budget. Feels like they're made for like $10. Guinea Pig 2, though, directed by extremely like respected and famous manga author Hideshi Hino, weirdly enough, who is like not as well known in the States, but in Japan is up there with like a Junji Ito level of like, this is the guy for horror manga. He directed this film, and it's basically like, it's this 40-minute film where a guy dressed in a weird samurai costume just drugs this woman and cuts all her limbs off. And that's basically it. But like, the one thing Guinea Pig has that a lot of these films didn't is like world-class special effects. Like, some of the best special effects artists in Japan were making these. So like, for research purposes, I watched this again last week. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty grisly. You could imagine if you were watching it on like...
I haven't seen it since I was a kid.
Yeah.
When we're all kids and we watch the Japanese snuff film.
We can do a bonus episode about Blake's weird history with these movies. You can imagine watching it in like a 5th generation VHS back in the day, like bootleg tape traded, where the fucking video quality is so shitty that you can't see the seams, and it's like, oh, this is real.
Right.
Watching it on my DVD, hate that I admit it, I own it on DVD. It's a lot. The picture quality is clear. You can see it. Anyway, all of this is getting to this crazy story where at some point, Charlie Sheen saw this movie. And there's a very famous story. If anyone's heard it before, you can skip ahead. Charlie Sheen was given this movie by it's either Chris Gore or Chaz Ballin, who are just like, people around this world at this time. Charlie Sheen was so freaked out, he reported this movie to the FBI or the MPAA. There's a bit of a mixed opinion on who it was reported to. Needless to say, the FBI launched an investigation on this movie because of Charlie Sheen, and had to like look into whether or not this was real or not. Ultimately, of course, it wasn't. It was a completely legal and fine film to have and distribute. So the point being, Manhunt is playing on a lot of these fears we see crop up, whether it's like ideas of real snuff or fake snuff that has been mistaken for real snuff. People seem to really think this is a danger to society, which, like, I'm not going to say there isn't real snuff in the world. People that have died and their movies have been sold somewhere on a black market or deep web. I also don't want to think too hard about it because I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about it. And some of these fake movies have been kind of linked to real murders, sometimes somewhat accurately, sometimes slightly erroneously. Like, Guinea Pig was tied to the Otaku murder, which was a horrible case out of Japan, where he had a guinea pig film, but it was a different guinea pig film, but they said it was the really bad one. So, like, that really almost ruined a lot of people's careers because of, like, false reporting. Faces of Death was tied to a murder case where I believe a kid killed someone because they, like, really wanted to feel what it was like after watching that movie.
Yeah, which is, similar to what we talked about last week.
Exactly.
About Manhunt being linked to these things.
Well, actually, the guinea pig case mirrors that Manhunt case a lot because it was like, it was somewhat involved, but it wasn't exactly the way it was reported and all this stuff, and it led to a whole bunch of controversy. I'm bringing all this up, one, because I think it's interesting. We should talk about it as the source material. Two, is like you start to understand the explicit horror Manhunt is kind of like delivering upon. Like, it is taking these very old ideas of what snuff is and this like secret shady cabal of elites making this stuff, and the cops are in on it and the government's in on it. Like, it's very much like kind of preying on these fears and poking a lot of fun at it, but also doing some interesting ideas with it. But it's like, it's not wholly fictional in that, like, a lot of people just believe this is real. And we've had a lot of cases of, like, actual investigations having to happen because someone's, like Charlie Sheen, saw a Japanese splatter film on a shitty VHS and called the FBI.
That is truly wild.
Yeah.
Thank you for the history lesson.
Sure.
That was really, really interesting. And I am excited with that knowledge to now play another one of these games and kind of see what they're doing with it, if anything.
I think snuff is like, it sounds weird to say, to be like, oh, I'm really into the idea, like, learning about snuff films, but I do think it teaches you a lot about, like, human psychology and just the way we fear, like, these things that have never been proven to. There are so many weird parallels with, like, QAnon. Obviously, like, QAnon is on such a bigger level, but, like, you start to see some of the frameworks of, like, conspiracy theories we deal with now in snuff, where it's like people just get it in their brains that these things exist, and it all of a sudden becomes like a part of their life, trying to debunk it or protect people from it.
Right, that it's like, well, if it exists, then every institution is tied into it.
Yeah, and it does affect people's livelihood. Like, whether or not you morally agree with the idea of making a pseudo snuff film, I do not think people should be demonized or have their livelihoods hurt by the fact they make those movies. But we've seen time and time again where, like, directors are really impacted by, like, someone thinking the art they made, whether you want to call it that or not, is dangerous to society because they like filmed a horror film. Essentially, there's a lot more dangerous art in the world than, like, a dude who thinks it's going to be cool to, like, work with his friends to make a fake movie where someone gets fucking cut up. Like, I don't think that's a problem in the world. It's, like, very low on my list of priorities. But, like, you do start to see these, like, weird groups show up. It's like, we got to protect the kids. They're going to be, like, kidnapped and tortured and sold to this black market. And it's like, it's not true. But we did get a cool video game about it.
We got a cool video game about it. And next week, we will see if we get 2 cool video games about it, or if they really should have cut their losses and just made the one. Manhunt 2, the first half of it, which actually I haven't looked up the levels, but generally the first half of that game, I can't imagine a lot of people are going to play along with us. But
if they want to, I'll say figure it out on your own. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can talk about how to play this game.
Yeah, playing this game is going to be tricky. But anyway, that's Something Rotten. Manhunt, open and shut. Ready for Manhunt 2.
Bye.